I would imagine things right here are pretty intense considering our relationship with Ukraine.
We've been very busy since the invasion began, and indeed we began preparing for this invasion when we got word that, as everyone did, that there was a high potential for it. We've had this 30-year partnership with the Ukrainian Armed Forces and the National Guard of Ukraine that gives us a lot of insight, not just because so many of us have served over there, but also because we've developed close collegial and personal relationships with many of their leaders, up to and including their most senior generals in the Ukrainian Armed Forces.
When this invasion began about 2 weeks ago, with your such close ties with the Ukrainian people, I mean, you've got personal friends over there. What was the first feeling that you had?
The first feeling, of course, was alarm. I couldn't believe that Putin had actually done it, even though that we knew that he intended to. And then, of course, profound sadness, because all of this time that we had spent working with the Ukrainians to prepare for them, the moment had come. But now we feel immense pride to see how brave and resilient the Ukrainian Armed Forces have been, and resilience in the Ukrainian people.
You were privy to a build-up to this. President Zelensky visited months prior to the invasion back in September, and you had a personal meeting with him here in Northern California. Do you recall what you talked about?
Sure. He was very interested in the partnership and the things that we were doing for the Ukrainian Armed Forces. He spent several hours with us at our Air National Guard base in Moffett Field in the Bay Area. We showed him all of the capabilities we had, and we exchanged ideas about what we could do further in the Cal Guard to help develop combat capability within the Ukrainian Armed Forces.
The Ukrainians and the Americans in the California National Guard have been training together for 30 years. Talk more about that history and then how it's playing into current events right now.
Sure. The relationship began right after the fall of the Soviet Union, where a handful of former Soviet republics were partnered with different states' National Guard. California was fortunate to have Ukraine to become our partner. At that time, our role was to teach the Ukrainians how to be a military that was subordinate to civil authority in a constitutional democracy. So it was really about things like rule of law, law of land warfare, how to behave with civilians as your boss instead of in a dictatorship. Over time, though, that relationship developed to be focused a lot on emergency response, which we excel at in the California Military Department and the California National Guard because we have so many emergencies here in California. But after 2014, the focus shift went after the Russians invaded eastern Ukraine back then. Our focus shifted to building combat and lethal capability within the Ukrainian Armed Forces.
How are you seeing that play out right now?
So again, as I mentioned, I'm very proud. We're seeing the Ukrainians use the skills that we helped them learn and that they developed on their own to great effect in blunting these Russian attacks.
And back to that meeting you had with Zelensky here in California. After that, a few months later, you went to Ukraine and you said something that was very interesting. You said, Ukrainians are on the front lines of democracy for all the citizens of the world. That was months before this Russian invasion. How telling now?
Well, now that is coming to true even more, because even then they were fighting Russians who were really fighting a proxy war with an insurgency in the eastern part of Ukraine with the breakaway republics. Now the Russian soldiers and airmen are fighting toe-to-toe with the Russians, actual Russian soldiers and the Russian armed forces in an overt and illegal invasion. It's true, though, that they are at the forefront of fighting for democracy. The rest of the world is rallying in support like no one expected to see, but we're extraordinarily proud of the fact that our Ukrainian partners are doing this on behalf of the rest of the world.
I know you can't be there for a number of reasons, politically and otherwise, but I imagine all of your tens of thousands of Cal Guard members wish they were there.
Every one of us wants to go and wants to help our partners. It's what we signed up to do. We signed up to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. At the end of the day, that means defending democracy, and democracy is on the line in Ukraine right now.
Of course, sir, you don't have a crystal ball. How do you see this playing out short-term and long-term?
So in the short term, the fighting is going to continue. The Russians are struggling to pretty much get their act together. The Ukrainian forces are performing very, very well, but it is a close-run thing. There are a lot of Russians that's in Russian capability that can still get into the fight. The Ukrainians are performing well, but over time their forces are getting whittled down. So we're very concerned. I am very encouraged, though, that by the response of the rest of the world, sending in massive amounts of military and humanitarian aid to bolster the Ukrainian armed forces, who are using all that help to very good effect.
What is the California National Guard doing behind the scenes right here in the Sacramento region to support our Ukrainian brothers and sisters?
So as soon as the invasion began, we fully activated our headquarters so that we could not only continue to focus on the things that we do here in the state, like respond to emergencies, house the homeless, our counter-drug operations, but also to be able to facilitate requirements and requests that are coming from the Ukrainians to other parts of the U.S. government in order to break down bureaucracy and streamline requests to get help to the Ukrainians as soon as possible.
I know you've been in contact with Zelensky's cabinet, all of his higher-up officials, probably every day, I would imagine. What can you tell us about those meetings and where they are today?
So we are in contact at all levels in the Ukrainian government. Personally, I am talking to members of the cabinet as well as the most senior generals in the Ukrainian Armed Forces, the National Guard of Ukraine, and the State Border Guard Service. Their morale is high. They are very, very encouraged every time they get news from us that more help is on the way. It buoys their spirits and allows them to continue to fight harder.
That's great to hear. What's your message to President Putin?
This is an illegal invasion. He needs to withdraw his forces. He is not achieving his objectives, and it's time for him to quit and go home.
What's your message to Ukrainians and to all of your friends over there? What's your message of hope to them?
We are so proud of them, and the fight that they're putting up is going to go down in the annals of history of one of the most impressive stand of people against illegal aggression.
And what would you like to say to all your service members here in California and all over the states?
Our job is to be ready for whatever comes next. So as soldiers and airmen, members of the United States Army and the United States Air Force, our job is to be ready if our country needs us. And of course, if at the call of the governor, if California needs us, we've got to be ready at a moment's notice to respond to save lives and property here in our own state.
And to all Americans out of the Guard, out of the service, what can we do? What's your message to all of us?
Pray for Ukraine. Consider going to legitimate sources that you can donate money to help the poor Ukrainians that are evacuating. It's their families, mostly women and young children, because the men are staying to fight. And a lot of the women are staying to fight, which is also very impressive, but not surprising, knowing the grit of the Ukrainian people. So I would just say continue to be well informed, and if you're of the right age and of the right mind, and you live in California, join the California National Guard or the California State Guard. There's no age limit in the California State Guard. We'll take you and we'll put you to good work.
You mentioned the grit of the Ukrainians, and I'm glad you brought that up because we're seeing that play out in the news. And those of us that aren't familiar with Ukraine necessarily may be surprised by that. You clearly not surprised by that. Talk more about the spirit of the Ukrainian, even prior to this Russian invasion.
Not surprised. We're not surprised at all because the Ukrainian are very, very proud people. They're very tough. They have a lot of recent combat experience in their military going back to 2014. They're good fighters. They're very patriotic and loyal to their country, and they are going to fight to the bitter end. The tactics the Russians are using are abhorrent to me as a professional soldier because many of them violate the laws of land warfare. They're deliberately targeting civilians in a terror campaign, knowing that they can't, through a normal conventional tactics, beat the Ukrainian armed forces. What they're doing is they're trying to encircle the cities and then rain fire down on the trapped civilians in order to force them to surrender or to force the Ukrainians to the bargaining table.
For the world watching this, especially those that aren't in the military, it's understanding why is really hard to do. And there's a lot of people trying to explain it, but I think the world is aghast.
We are aghast. If you are a student of Putin, you understand what his personal motivations are. There's a lot of reasons, strategic reasons, why Russia would want to be involved in Ukraine. Almost all of them are economic. But at the end of the day, a lot of it is just personal, emotional reasons and ego in order to restore the glory of the Russian Empire, which he's failing to do.
I was going to ask you about his motives, and obviously energy, money, wealth, power, clearly part of that, but you mentioned something more on a personal level, which was interesting.
Yeah, so let me talk about the economic reasons, of course. Ukraine is the breadbasket of Eastern Europe. They're like California. They're a huge agricultural producing nation. They have a lot of industrial capability, a lot of really smart, well-educated people that can help an economy run. They have access to the Black Sea. So there's a lot of natural resources. So there's a lot of economic reasons why the Russians would be interested in going into Ukraine. The personal reasons, though, go more towards this notion of expanding the Russian Empire and restoring the glory of the old Russian Empire and indeed the Soviet Union. And Ukraine plays a big part of that in the minds of the Russians. The Ukrainians, though, see it the other way. They have always felt that they are ethnically and nationally a different identity than the Russian people. And they want to and should and will stay a free and sovereign country.
There's obviously ties to Russia. There's many people in Ukraine who are Ukrainian who still speak Russian. Has Putin tried to use that to his advantage?
He has indeed, and he has tried through an information campaign to leverage that capability in spoofing the Ukrainian people and his own people into the motivation behind the invasion and how it's going and the legality, but it's not working. People are seeing through it. People around the world see through it. It's a sham, it's illegal, and it needs to stop. We're apolitical in the military. We just are soldiers and airmen, and we are loyal to our Constitution, not to any particular political party. But around the world, not just here in America, people from every political belief, every nationality, every faith, every descriptor you can imagine are absolutely appalled by this illegal behavior by Mr. Putin, and it has to stop.